You've probably heard of the 27 Club. Jimi Hendrix, Kurt Cobain, Amy Winehouse, different decades, different genres, same age, 27. Usually when people talk about it, it seems as a coincidence, lifestyle, or just bad luck. Drugs, fame, pressure, that's it. But the thing is, the 27 Club didn't start with rock stars. It didn't start with Hollywood. It started long before that, with a blues musician from Mississippi. Someone I haven't heard of before this. And when you look at the pattern far enough back, things change. Because it's not about the addiction, fame, or burnout. It becomes about something much older. Something people used to take very seriously. The idea that talent has a price, that greatness demands a payment, and sometimes that bill comes early. That's when people start using different phrases. They say they sold their soul to the devil. And once you start looking at who gets remembered forever and who disappears after one song, someone who dies right at their peak, you start to wonder, is this really just a myth? Or is it a warning we stop taking seriously? Because today's episode isn't really about the 27 Club. It's about what people believe you have to give up to get everything, and whether anyone can really get it back. Hello and welcome to Ellis and the Unknown. If it's your first time listening, welcome. I'm Krista. I hope everyone had a good holiday and a happy new year. Welcome 2026. I am looking forward to this year and to making more episodes. If you've been enjoying this show and want to help support, just subscribing if you're listening on YouTube, or following and rating on Spotify and Apple. Any little help like that is very appreciated. Also, if you want to share it with a friend or someone that you think would like this kind of stuff, please do. Ellis and the Unknown exists because I don't think the unknown is something to fear. I think it's something we need to learn about, think about. It's something that we forgot how to just sit with. I don't do this podcast because I think I have all the answers. I do it because I think we're not meant to. And it's fun to question all these things. I'm not here to tell you what to believe. I'm just here to explore why so many people across history believed the same things and why those beliefs never really went away. They're always still lingering in the background. So today we're talking about one of the oldest and most dangerous ideas of all, selling your soul. Most people probably have heard someone say, oh, they definitely sold their soul, like it's a joke. Usually it's about a celebrity or someone who got suddenly really successful really fast. They sold their soul to the devil. But what does that actually mean? Is it a literal contract signed in blood? Or is it something more subtle? By the end of this episode, I want you to ask yourself one thing. If someone offered you everything you ever wanted, what would it cost you? The concept of selling your soul shows up across Christian demonology, European folklore, and later now in American pop culture. Traditionally, it's a pact made with the devil, or it could be a demon, in exchange for wealth, fame, talent, power, or knowledge, often sealed through blood signatures, spoken vows, or an act of devotion. Hollywood rumors, actors, musicians, elites pay a price for fame. In almost every story, the reward comes fast and the cost comes later. And the cost of selling your soul is eternal damnation. loss of the soul, and often suffering or madness. Modern culture softened the idea. Now selling your soul is treated as a metaphor, abandoning your values, choosing success over integrity. And sure, sometimes it is used that way, but the explanation only exists because people became uncomfortable with the older one. Because it's harder to accept that greatness might actually require a sacrifice. But before we talk about the devil, we have to talk about what people believe the soul is worth. The soul is always believed to be worth everything. At its core, people believe it's the most valuable thing you own. Across cultures and folklore, the soul is believed to be your true self, your moral compass, the part of you that outlives your body, consciousness, identity, and your will. This means that once your soul is gone, you're still alive, but something essential is missing. And that idea is what's so terrifying. In Christianity, the soul is eternal. It outlasts wealth, power, and even memory. There is nothing on earth worth the soul. Not fame, not success, not survival. So if someone gives it up, are they choosing something unnaturally valuable in return? In psychology, the soul is your identity. If you take away the religion, the soul becomes your values, your empathy, your sense of right and wrong. When people say that they sold their soul, it could mean they became someone they don't recognize anymore. The cost isn't hell, it's the alienation from yourself. And in modern culture, the soul is worth success. Being seen, being remembered, being untouchable, and being above others. That is where the phrase still survives. Because when someone rises too fast, too perfectly, too completely, people believe it's something that a human must have exchanged for. There's a saying people say, anything that gives you everything must take something irreplaceable. That's why the myth never dies. Deep down, people believe power has a cost, greatness demands sacrifice, and some prices shouldn't be paid. So selling your soul, we hear this often. Like I said, in pop culture, a singer who suddenly comes out of nowhere and tops the charts, or a new actor you see in every movie and wonder how they got here. Sometimes it is hard for people to believe that greatness can be earned, so they look for another explanation. Obviously, this isn't the case for every single famous actor or singer, but there are cases that are a little suspicious. So while I was researching this topic, I found an artist from the deep south of the United States in Mississippi. He's probably the first name that will pop up when you search Selling Your Soul to the Devil. His name was Robert Johnson. He was a famous blues musician and songwriter. He is recognized as the master of blues, particularly in Delta blues style, and even the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame describes him as perhaps the first ever rock star. So Robert was born in 1911. This was a time of segregation, extreme poverty, and violence. A time when Black Americans had very little protection, very little opportunity, and even less room to fail. His stepdad was chased off by an angry mob that wanted to lynch him. Robert grew up not in the easiest life. And in his 20s, he began to travel around playing his music because he did not want to work on the plantation. Most people living in Mississippi back then were Christian, and they believed that the blues was the devil's music. Most likely because men were spending more time in the jukes rather than coming into church. So they saw it as a threat to Christianity. Robert Johnson was not born a legend. Many accounts when he was young says he wasn't that good. Some people would laugh at his playing. Other musicians wouldn't even let him touch their guitar because he would play around with the strings, trying new techniques. and they didn't want him breaking their strings on the guitar. Then there's a stage where he just disappeared. For about a year, Robert Johnson vanished from the local music scene. When he finally returned, everything had changed. His guitar work was complex, fast, unnatural, some said. He played like two people at once, bassline and melody together, something that was rare at that time. In a world where talent was believed to be given, not learned, people needed an explanation for this change. And the explanation they chose, of course, was the devil. They said he went to the crossroads one night and met the devil. He got down on his knee and handed the devil his guitar, and the devil tuned it and gave it back to him, making the deal and selling his soul. People began pointing to his songs as evidence of this. One song called Me and the Devil Blues from 1937. In the lyrics, it goes, "Early this morning, when you knocked upon my door, I said, 'Hello, Satan, I believe it's time to go.'" Later in the song, he sings, "Me and the devil walking side by side." A lot of people freaked out about this because this was one of the very few blues songs of the era that directly names Satan. And the devil is portrayed as a companion, not as an enemy, which in that time would have been very jarring to a lot of people. Today, many people believe the devil in the song represents inner demons, guilt, addiction, or self-destruction. There's also another song that he sings called "The Hellhound on My Trail," again in 1937. And it says, "I got to keep moving, I gotta keep moving, blues falling down like hail, and the days keep worrying me, there's a hellhound on my trail." So why does this lyric match up to what we're talking about? Hellhounds are traditionally demonic pursuers. So it kind of creates this image of him being haunted, of him trying to escape consequences, maybe fear of death. If you made a deal, wouldn't you always feel like something was coming for you? But there is another version or explanation of Robert Johnson's disappearance. Maybe he didn't go to the crossroads and sell his soul. Some historians believe Robert didn't disappear to meet the devil at all. Instead, he returned to his hometown and spent months obsessively practicing the guitar. Not in public, though, not in the juke joints, but it's said that he would practice in graveyards. Graveyards, if you think about them, are quiet. No crowds, no laughter, no one to tell him to stop playing. Robert didn't just practice, he studied over and over, night after night. And imagining how this looked to people watching from the outside, I can see why this rumor would have started. A man disappears, he's seen late at night among the dead, playing music that people already believed was the devil music. And then he comes back and suddenly he's brilliant. A man alone in the graveyard with a guitar became a man kneeling at the crossroads. A teacher became the devil. Practice became a pack. Because the truth might be that Robert Johnson didn't sell his soul at all. He just gave everything to his music. His time, his safety, his body, his peace. And in a world where people didn't believe Black men could earn that level of greatness, that obsession looked like evil. Robert Johnson died in 1938, so just a year after those songs were released, at just 27 years old. Nobody is exactly sure how he died, and even later, when they found his death certificate, there is no cause of death written on it. So this leaves room for speculation. Some people believe that he died from the result of being poisoned by a club owner angry at Johnson who had made love to his wife. There's no actual proof of that. That could just be a rumor that has been passed down until now. But there is no cause of death for him. But this makes him one of the earliest members of what we now call the 27 Club. Even before Robert Johnson, there was a man, Tommy Johnson, also born in Mississippi and was an artist starting out in the 1920s. They are not related, even though they have the same last name, but they lived on similar plantations close to each other. Tommy lived near Drew, Mississippi, close to the Dockery plantation, and that's where Robert lived. So Tommy also traveled widely around the South. That was very common way for them, for musicians. They had to travel to different towns to get their name out. It's not like now where you can just post it on Spotify. So unlike Robert, though, Tommy himself claimed to have sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads in exchange for his mastery of guitar, according to his brother Liddell. So maybe this is where that idea started. I think a lot of it comes down to uncomfortable truth. People back then couldn't believe a Black man could become that talented, that successful without something supernatural helping them. So they created a story to make it make sense. And they said that he sold his soul. Also, back then, when we talk about the devil as an enemy, as walking next to, it's so unheard of. Unlike today's world where there's so much pop culture around worshiping the devil, we're kind of desensitized to it all. Maybe artists point towards it to get more famous and talked about, but we no longer know what to really think about it because it seems to be so entwined in our culture. For example, on the top of my head, I think about Doja Cat. She became a huge pop star, and then all of a sudden she just totally switched and is super demonic and dressing up as demons and just very satanic style. And maybe that's just to get views, but you got to think deeper sometimes and wonder what is really happening. So is that just the artists themselves doing that to get all this attention and get us to talk about this? Or is there something behind all of this, like selling your soul to the devil? People want to believe there's a reason that talent has a limit and that fame demands a payment. The 27 Club isn't a curse or a payment of life. It could be just a pattern, young people that give too much too fast, surrounded by pressure with no room to be humans. They have a lot on them. Instead, people believe that they sold their soul because selling your soul is a way to explain a success that feels unfair or talent that feels unnatural. It also kind of creates discomfort because if success comes from a deal with the devil, then the rest of us didn't fail. We just refused the offer. There's also a moral safety in this myth that if someone rises quickly and collapses publicly, the story becomes simple, that they paid the price, the universe stays balanced, no randomness, no injustice, no unanswered questions. When we talk about selling your soul, we usually focus on people who made it big. The legends, the icons, the ones who seem to never disappear. But there's another group we rarely talk about. The ones who didn't stay. The one-hit wonders. When I was talking to my sister about this is what she mentioned to me, and I thought, yes, you're totally right. What about the one-hit wonders? Artists who released one massive song, something that was huge, and then nothing. They didn't chase fame. They didn't dominate the charts years after year. They just vanished. Some people tend to laugh at that, saying it's just a fluke, that they got lucky and they couldn't create anything else. But what if it's something else? Maybe they saw what they had to sacrifice and what they had to give up, and they declined. Some artists have talked about being pressured to change who they are, to stay marketable instead of honest and true to themselves. Others walked away because the cost became obvious early on. And maybe that's true. Maybe they did not want to sell their soul to the devil. Maybe they saw what they had to sacrifice to keep this fame, and they decided against it, and that's why we don't see them anymore. Selling your soul can feel like a metaphor at times. It's a way to explain the obsession, ambition, or self-destruction of these legends. But there's another way to look at it. What if selling your soul was never meant to be symbolic, but it's really real? Long before Hollywood and even before Robert Johnson, there was Faust. Faust is a real historical figure, a German scholar and an alchemist, living in the late 1400s. His story became influential not because it is entertaining, but because people believed it could happen. Faust was brilliant. He studied theology, medicine, physiology, science, and still that wasn't enough. Knowledge didn't satisfy him. Power didn't fulfill him. He wanted more than a human life could offer. So he did something forbidden. Faust deliberately summoned a demon named Mephistopheles. Not out of fear or desperation, but out of desire. He wanted to access knowledge and pleasure that existed beyond human limits. Mephistopheles made him an offer. Faust would be granted everything he wanted in this life: unlimited knowledge, pleasure, influence, success. But in return, he pledged his soul in exchange for 24 years of service. When his life ended, his soul would belong to hell. The agreement was written and it was signed in blood. At the time of these stories were told, people genuinely believed demons could be summoned, grimoires existed, rituals were practiced, and the line between spiritual and the physical world felt thin and dangerous. And as the 24 years came to an end, the devil appeared and announced Faust's death for the coming night. In the morning, his room, walls, and floors were found splattered with blood and brains, with Faust's eyes laying on the floor and his dead body in the courtyard. Faust's story was never meant to glorify ambition. It was meant as a warning. And the most unsettling part of Faust's story is that the devil doesn't trick him at all. Mephistopheles is honest, clear, calm. Faust knows the price, but he agrees anyway. That detail matters because if selling your soul is real, and it isn't about being fooled, it's about consent. When you look back at Robert Johnson through this lens, the parallels become harder to ignore. A man disappears, returns transformed, speaks of walking beside the devil, and then dies young. Maybe the devil doesn't come to people who are weak. Maybe he comes to people who just want more talent, more recognition, more than the ordinary life can give. Sometimes, though, no devil appears at all. There's another story, 1890. Oscar Wilde, he wrote The Picture of Dorian Gray. At first glance, it's about beauty and vanity, but underneath, it's the same thing that we've been talking about. In this story, Dorian Gray is young, beautiful, admired. And when he realizes that his beauty will fade with time, something in him snaps. He doesn't summon a demon. He doesn't sign a contract. He simply wishes. He wishes that he could stay young forever and that a portrait of him would age instead. And this wish comes true. Dorian gets everything people want: youth, desire, freedom from consequence. But there is a catch. Every cruel act he commits, every lie, every moral compromise, it doesn't show on his face, but it shows on the portrait's face. The painting grows more grotesque, more corrupted, while Dorian stays perfect. Dorian Gray doesn't suffer right away. In fact, for a long time, his life improves. People admired him. People adored him. He seemed untouchable. And that's how most soul-selling stories actually work. The consequences are delayed, hidden, out of sight, just like the portrait locked away in a room for no one to see. Faust signs the contract knowing the cost, but Dorian Gray never does that. There's no ritual, no demon, no blood. There's only a wish. In Christianity, the soul is believed to be created by God and destined for eternal life. It cannot be destroyed, but it can be lost. The idea alone is what makes selling the soul so terrifying. The Bible never directly describes a person selling their soul to the devil in a way that folklore does, but the concept is absolutely there. In the book of Matthew, Jesus asks a question: what does it profit a man to gain the whole world, yet forfeit his soul? That line matters because it frames the soul as something that can be traded, not physically handed over, but surrendered through choice. It also says in the book of Mark, "But what will a man give in exchange for his soul?" During the Middle Ages, many people genuinely believed that written pacts with the demons were possible, that these weren't fairy tales to them. Court records from witch trials included alleged contracts signed in blood, presented as evidence that a soul had been surrendered. To them, selling your soul didn't mean waking up in hell immediately. It meant living a life where God no longer had authority over you. That's why success gained through immortal means is often viewed as suspicious. If someone rose too fast, had too much influence, or displayed unnatural talent, people believe something spiritual must be involved. In Judaism, the soul is considered a divine spark from God. While there is no concept of selling your soul to Satan, there is a belief that repeated immoral actions damage the soul and distance it from God. Across religions, the patterns are the same. That evil cannot take the soul, it can only convince someone to give it up. And that's what makes the idea so unsettling. The devil doesn't need a signature, he just needs an agreement. So when people say they sold their soul, maybe they're just recognizing a spiritual line that was crossed. Some theologians argue that the idea of selling your soul is a misunderstanding of sin, that you're not transferring ownership, you're just damaging the relationship with the divine, which means in this theory that you can get your soul back. Folklore is much darker. In many legends, a soul can only be reclaimed if the contract is broken before death. Sometimes the devil is tricked, sometimes the contract is destroyed, and another soul is offered in exchange. In many versions of the Faust story, Faust does not escape, but in others he does, only through divine intervention at the very last moment. Folklore leaves the message unclear on purpose because the danger isn't losing the soul, it's believing that you still have time to fix it later. So, can you get your soul back? Religion says yes, folklore says maybe, reality says only if you're willing to lose what you've gained. Selling your soul doesn't always look the way the stories tell it. Sometimes it's a contract signed knowingly, like Faust. Sometimes it's a wish you pretend you didn't mean, like Dorian Gray. And sometimes it's a life spent chasing something so completely that there's nothing left over when it's done. Robert Johnson didn't leave behind a confession. The artist of 27 Club didn't leave instructions. And most people who make these trades don't announce them at all. They just disappear behind the version of themselves the world remembers. Maybe the devil doesn't stand at the crossroads anymore. Maybe he doesn't need to. Maybe he waits in places that feels reasonable, in ambition, in urgency, and in the promise that you can fix it later. Because every version of the story, the cost isn't collected right away. It's delayed, it's hidden, it's locked in another room. The question isn't whether selling your soul is real. The question is whether you notice when the damage stops showing on the surface. So, do you believe that someone can sell their soul? I do think it's possible. Across religions, folklore, and history, the idea of selling your soul shows up independently over and over again. Different cultures, different centuries, same thing. A choice is made, a reward comes quickly, a cost is delayed, and the soul is given, not stolen. That kind of consistency usually means people weren't just telling stories for fun, that there's some kind of truth behind it. They were trying to explain something they experienced or feared deeply. I do not think that everyone who succeeds made a deal, but I do think that some people knowingly cross a spiritual line for power, influence, or recognition, and that line changes them as much as they allow it. If this episode made you feel uncomfortable, good, because it made you question what's real and you stepped a little closer to the unknown. I'm Krista, and thank you for listening.